Val Kilmer's death shocked the world, but nothing could prepare fans for what was uncovered afterward. As Hollywood mourned the loss of one of its brightest stars, an unsettling document surfaced, Val Kilmer's autopsy report. Buried inside were details so disturbing, so unexpected, they left everyone questioning what really happened in his final days. This isn't the story the headlines told you. It's what was quietly hidden behind the tributes and movie montages. A truth that changes everything you thought you knew about Val Kilmer's last chapter. Stay tuned, because what's inside that report will stun you. Hollywood mourns the shocking death of Val Kilmer on April 1, 2025. The news hit like a gut punch across Hollywood and beyond. Val Kilmer was gone. The iconic actor, best known for his unforgettable roles in Top Gun, Batman Forever, and The Doors, had passed away at the age of 65. The cause? Pneumonia complications, according to the official statement. But as the headlines flooded social media and fans paid tribute, something about the story felt incomplete. The tributes started pouring in almost instantly. Director Michael Mann, who worked with Kilmer on Heat, described him as a brilliant, unpredictable force who left an indelible mark on every scene he touched. Josh Brolin shared a heartfelt message, "See you, pal. I'm going to miss you. You were a brave, creative firecracker." Even the official Top Gun account mourned the loss of their beloved Iceman, writing, "A legend on and off-screen, Val Kilmer, you'll be missed." Actors, filmmakers, and musicians all joined the chorus of grief, posting a black-and-white photo of Kilmer as Doc Holliday in Tombstone, while director Francis Ford Coppola remembered him as a natural talent that deepened with age. Some messages were long, some were short, but they all carried the same undertone: shock, sadness, and a shared sense that this loss came too soon. And yet, beyond the flowers, the statements, and the media retrospectives, there were whispers. The public had known Val Kilmer was unwell for years. He fought a long, visible battle with throat cancer, a battle he finally went public about in 2017 after years of speculation and denial. Fans watched him lose his voice, struggle to breathe, and eventually disappear from the spotlight, except for one final powerful appearance in Top Gun, Maverick. But even then, when he returned to the screen with the help of voice AI and creative filmmaking, many sensed it was a farewell. Still, when news of his death broke, most people assumed it was the long-term damage from his cancer treatment that finally caught up with him. Pneumonia in a weakened body wasn't surprising. What was surprising was what happened after. In the days following his death, as tributes kept rolling in and media outlets ran endless highlight reels of Kilmer's greatest roles, a different conversation quietly began behind closed doors. Close friends, former colleagues, and even members of his own family started admitting that they hadn't known how bad things really were. Several hinted that Val Kilmer had been withdrawing more and more in the months leading up to his death, ignoring calls, refusing visitors, turning down offers of help. It wasn't long before fans started asking questions. Why hadn't anyone seen him publicly in months? Why were there rumors that he'd been hospitalized several times in the last year without it ever making the news? And why, despite the official cause being pneumonia, was there a delay in releasing his full autopsy report? At first, these questions got buried under the avalanche of tributes. But a few reporters kept digging. There were whispers that the autopsy revealed something unsettling, details that went far beyond what anyone expected. Details that suggested Kilmer's final chapter might have been even darker than the public ever knew. For now, though, the world mourned. Fans revisited their favorite Val Kilmer films. Social media feeds were flooded with old interviews, movie clips, and photos of Kilmer smiling in his prime. But behind the collective grief, a quiet sense of unease lingered. Because while the headlines declared how he died, the real story, the one buried in the fine print of his final medical report, was still waiting to be uncovered. And when it finally surfaced, it left everyone stunned. Before the tributes and the headlines about his death, before the questions about what the autopsy revealed, Val Kilmer was something else entirely, a force of nature in Hollywood. A man who could light up the screen and disappear behind a character like few others, but also a man surrounded by rumors, friction, and mystery long before his final days. Val Kilmer's rise was fast and unforgettable. Born in Los Angeles in 1959, he was a California kid who chased the arts early. He became the youngest person ever accepted into Juilliard's prestigious drama program at the time. From there, it didn't take long before Hollywood came calling. His breakout role came in Top Secret. In 1984, a comedy that hinted at his ability to shift between charm and chaos. But it was Top Gun in 1986 that made him a household name. As Tom "Iceman" Kazansky, Kilmer stole scenes from Tom Cruise with ease, playing the cool, cocky rival who somehow became the heart of the story. From there, his career exploded. He slipped effortlessly into roles like Jim Morrison in The Doors, a performance so uncanny even Morrison's bandmates were stunned, and Doc Holliday in Tombstone, where his portrayal of the Southern gunslinger became legendary. He became Batman in Batman Forever, one of the highest-grossing films of the 90s. Though that role came with baggage of its own. Because as his star power grew, so did the rumors about Val Kilmer being difficult. Stories from movie sets began to swirl. Directors called him demanding, unpredictable, even combative. On the chaotic set of The Island of Dr. Moreau, Kilmer clashed so badly with the crew and fellow actors that one director walked off the job. Joel Schumacher, who directed him in Batman Forever, bluntly called him psychologically troubled and said he was the most challenging actor he'd worked with. Kilmer pushed back against these claims, later saying he was misunderstood, a perfectionist who wanted to dive deep into his roles and wasn't afraid to speak his mind. But the damage to his reputation lingered. In the early 2000s, he became less bankable, less visible, and quietly retreated from the front lines of Hollywood. Still, there was something about Kilmer that made him magnetic. Even when the press painted him as temperamental, directors kept casting him, and fans kept watching. There was always a sense that beneath the public persona, there was a man wrestling with something much bigger than the roles he played. And then came the illness. When whispers began around 2014 that Kilmer's health was failing, he stayed silent. His noticeable weight loss, his raspy voice, the cancelled appearances, none of it was addressed publicly for years. He denied reports of cancer, even when friends and fans noticed something was clearly wrong. It wasn't until 2017 that Kilmer finally admitted it. He had been fighting throat cancer, a battle he had kept hidden while quietly undergoing chemotherapy, radiation, and eventually a tracheotomy that robbed him of his natural voice. Fans admired his honesty when he finally spoke about it. They celebrated his resilience when he appeared in public again, frail but smiling. And when he returned as Iceman in Top Gun, Maverick, they took it as a victory, a comeback moment. But here's the thing, the more you looked back at Kilmer's life, the more you realized how much he'd kept from the world. A career filled with unforgettable roles, yes, but also years of tension, secrecy, and silence about what was really happening behind the scenes. And it wasn't just during his career. Because what no one knew then, what even his family and closest friends couldn't have seen coming, was that his need to hide, to protect his privacy at all costs, wouldn't stop at his career or his illness. It would follow him right to the end. The most disturbing part of his story wouldn't come from the tabloids or the interviews. It would come from what was discovered after he died, the private battle. 4 years, Val Kilmer's public life looked like a highlight reel, red carpets, blockbuster films, interviews where he flashed that trademark smirk. But behind the headlines and the camera flashes, Kilmer was fighting a battle he refused to talk about. A battle that, by the time the world found out, had already cost him almost everything. It began quietly around 2014. Fans started to notice something different about him. He looked thinner, weaker, his voice sounded rough and hoarse. During public appearances, there were cancelled events, reports of hospitalization, and blurry photos of him looking frail. Rumors swirled that he was seriously ill, but every time the press asked, Kilmer denied it. He insisted he was fine, even when he clearly wasn't. It wasn't until 2017 that the truth finally came out. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Kilmer confirmed what many had suspected. He had been diagnosed with throat cancer. He had spent the past 3 years undergoing radiation, chemotherapy, and a tracheotomy that permanently altered his ability to speak. He downplayed it in typical Kilmer fashion, joking about his raspy voice and claiming he was doing well. But the truth was more complicated. The treatments had saved his life, but they had taken almost everything else. His once commanding voice, the one that carried through films like The Doors and Tombstone, was reduced to a faint, breathy whisper. His health was fragile, his breathing was labored, and eating became difficult. He couldn't work the way he used to. For a man who had spent decades in front of the camera, this was a private hell. But Kilmer didn't want pity. Instead, he tried to reshape the narrative. In 2021, he released a deeply personal documentary, simply titled Val, made with the help of his children. The film used decades of home video footage and voiceover narration to tell his story, from his childhood to his Hollywood rise and finally, his battle with cancer. It was raw, honest, and at times, uncomfortable to watch. Audiences saw not the polished star, but the fragile man behind the fame. For many fans, Val was catharsis, a chance to finally understand the man who had spent so long hiding behind characters and headlines. But there were things even the documentary didn't reveal. Because while Kilmer was open about his illness by then, there were still parts of his story he kept to himself, parts that friends, family, and even doctors would later admit they didn't fully understand. He had won the fight against cancer, that's what the headline said. He was in remission, living quietly in Los Angeles, focusing on his art, his family, and small independent projects. But those closest to him knew that remission didn't mean he had escaped unscathed. The tracheotomy had left him permanently vulnerable. His immune system was weak. He struggled with breathing, eating, and speaking every single day. And beyond the physical toll, there were hints of something deeper, something emotional. Isolation. Withdrawn behavior. A growing reluctance to let anyone into his world. He wasn't the same Val Kilmer people remembered. And behind the hopeful headlines about his recovery, his health quietly continued to decline. By the time his final months arrived, even those closest to him admitted that he wasn't reaching out anymore. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't letting anyone see how bad it had gotten. Val Kilmer's battle ended in victory when he beat cancer, but what the public didn't realize, what even those around him failed to grasp, was that the scars of that battle ran far deeper than anyone knew. Those scars would come back to the surface in the most unexpected and disturbing way after he was gone. His last appearance on screen was a powerful moment for fans who grew up watching Val Kilmer rule the big screen. His return in Top Gun, Maverick felt like a moment frozen in time. It was 2022, nearly 4 decades after the original film made him a household name, and there he was again, Tom "Iceman" Kazansky, standing beside Tom Cruise's Maverick. But this time, there was something different, something fragile behind the cool exterior. By the time Maverick hit theaters, everyone knew Kilmer's voice had been permanently damaged. His battle with throat cancer wasn't a secret anymore. What many didn't know was how much effort went into getting him back on screen at all. The producers, Cruise, and Kilmer himself worked carefully to make it happen. Kilmer's health was declining, he couldn't speak properly, and even simple scenes were a physical challenge, but he wanted to do it, not just for the fans but for himself. It was a chance to close the loop on a character that had, in many ways, defined his career. The filmmakers used a mix of creative techniques to bring Iceman back to life. They had Iceman communicate by typing text messages, and when he finally spoke, it was brief, just a few simple words. But even those few lines carried weight because they weren't just coming from Iceman, they were coming from Kilmer himself. What the audience heard in that scene wasn't entirely his real voice. It was a blend of his actual speech and cutting-edge AI voice technology. Kilmer had worked with a software company to digitally recreate his voice based on archival recordings. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to remind the world of the voice they had missed. When the movie premiered, the reaction was immediate. Fans around the world were moved to tears, and critics praised the scene as one of the most emotional moments in the film. It wasn't about the dialogue, it was about what it represented, a man who had lost everything returning for one last bow. But off-screen, things were less polished. Those who worked on the film later admitted how hard the process had been. Kilmer's physical condition was fragile, and every day on set was a struggle. The scenes were carefully staged to minimize how much he had to speak or move, and when the cameras stopped rolling, Kilmer would quietly retreat, exhausted. After the film's release, Kilmer did a few interviews and public appearances, but it was clear he was fading from the spotlight. He spent most of his time at home, surrounded by his children and close friends, focusing on painting and writing. Fans believed they had witnessed a comeback, a triumphant return of a legend, but what most people missed was the real message behind that Maverick scene, that it wasn't a comeback, it was a farewell. In many ways, Kilmer's appearance in Maverick served as a carefully crafted goodbye. He gave the audience closure, but behind the scenes, he was already slipping away. His health was deteriorating faster than anyone realized, and while fans celebrated the return of Iceman, Kilmer quietly disappeared from public life once again. The scene was emotional, powerful, and for many, heartbreaking, but it wasn't the full story. Because what no one watching that movie could have imagined was that Kilmer's true final chapter wouldn't play out on the big screen, it would unfold months after he was gone, in a report no one was prepared to read. For all the headlines, the box office numbers, and the iconic roles, Val Kilmer's personal life was something he rarely put on display. He spent decades in the public eye, but the man behind the camera remained something of a mystery. As the years passed, that mystery only deepened. Kilmer's love life, like much of his career, was a mix of intensity and turbulence. In 1988, at the height of his rising fame, he married Joanne Whalley, the British actress he met on the set of Willow. The two seemed like a Hollywood fairy tale, young, talented, beautiful, together. They had 2 children, Mercedes, born in 1991, and Jack, born in 1995. But behind the scenes, the pressures of fame and personal struggles took their toll, and by 1996, their marriage had quietly ended in divorce. For the most part, Kilmer remained close to his children. In interviews, he often described them as his greatest source of pride. They appeared in his documentary Val, and it was clear they had become his emotional anchor after years of ups and downs in Hollywood. But outside of his role as a father, Kilmer's personal relationships were rocky. Over the years, he was linked to a string of high-profile women, Cindy Crawford, Daryl Hannah, and even Angelina Jolie during the filming of Alexander. The tabloids loved the headlines, but Kilmer rarely confirmed or talked about these romances. He kept his private life, well, private. In his later years, that privacy turned into something else, isolation. After his cancer diagnosis, Kilmer's world grew smaller. His health struggles forced him to retreat from public life, but it wasn't just physical. Friends and family began to notice he wasn't letting people in the way he used to. Invitations went unanswered, calls went unreturned. He spent long stretches alone at home in Los Angeles, surrounded mostly by his art, his journals, and his memories. Some of that was understandable. Cancer and its treatments had left him physically drained and emotionally spent. His voice was a whisper, his body frail. Public appearances were exhausting. But even in private, Kilmer seemed to be closing himself off. In his own words, he described himself as a deeply spiritual person, someone who believed in signs, symbols, and the greater meaning of life. But that belief also made him fiercely protective of his space. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want to be seen as a victim. That protective instinct, though, came with a cost. Friends later admitted that in the last year of his life, Kilmer became harder to reach. He wasn't responding to messages, he avoided gatherings, and even some family members said they hadn't seen him in months before his death. To the outside world, it looked like a man living quietly, recovering from illness. But to those who knew him best, there were growing concerns. Was he struggling more than he let on? Was he hiding something? Or had the years of fighting, first in Hollywood, then with his health, simply worn him down? When news of his death broke, those closest to him were devastated but not entirely surprised. They had seen the signs of decline, the growing silence, the physical toll. What they hadn't seen, what none of them could have guessed, was what the final official report about his death would reveal. Because buried beneath the headlines and tributes was a truth no one had expected, a truth that painted a far more disturbing picture of Kilmer's final months. When that truth finally came out, it left even those closest to him questioning how well they really knew Val Kilmer at all. After Val Kilmer's death, the world grieved and moved on. His films were streamed, his interviews rewatched, his Iceman legacy celebrated. It felt like the story had ended, a beloved actor gone too soon after years of health struggles. But then came the document no one had expected to make headlines, Val Kilmer's autopsy report. At first glance, it confirmed what everyone already knew: pneumonia complications in an already fragile body. But tucked deeper in the report were details that painted a far more unsettling picture. It wasn't the cause of death that shocked people, it was everything else. The coroner's report noted signs of severe malnutrition in Kilmer's final months. His weight had dropped well below what was considered healthy for his height and age. There were clear indicators of muscle wasting, something doctors described as common in terminal illnesses, but in this case, unusually advanced. It raised an uncomfortable question. Had he stopped eating? Had he given up? But that wasn't all. There were also mentions of multiple untreated infections, minor at first, but left unaddressed long enough to cause further strain on his weakened immune system. According to the report, these infections could have been easily treated had they been caught earlier. It seemed Kilmer either hadn't noticed or hadn't told anyone. Even more concerning were the notes about chronic surgical wounds that had not fully healed, some dating back to his earlier cancer surgeries. There were signs of ongoing physical stress and neglect. The report mentioned that in the months before his death, he had been refusing medical care, opting to stay at home despite clear signs that he needed help. And then there were the toxicology results. While there was no trace of illegal substances or overdose, the report confirmed high levels of prescription pain medication in his system. Not enough to kill him, but enough to suggest he'd been living in considerable, unmanaged pain. The official language in the report was clinical and cold, but the message was clear. Val Kilmer hadn't just died from pneumonia. He had been quietly deteriorating physically and mentally for far longer than anyone around him realized. When the details hit the news, headlines everywhere repeated the same phrase, disturbing details found in Val Kilmer's autopsy report, and they weren't exaggerating. Because the real shock wasn't that he died, it was how much he had suffered in silence, how much he had hidden from everyone. His fans, his friends, even his family. It seemed Kilmer had spent his final months the same way he had lived much of his life, protecting his privacy at all costs, shielding the world from his pain, even when it was eating him alive. In the end, the autopsy revealed more than just a cause of death. It exposed the weight of what he carried alone, the unspoken struggles, the neglected wounds, the quiet descent no one saw coming. And that's the part of Val Kilmer's story no one will ever forget. What do you think drives someone to hide their suffering so well that even those closest to them don't see it? Pride, privacy, or something far deeper?